What you just saw were a fraction of the resumes and cover letters I wrote during 2.5 years of my desperate job search. This is my testimony of about 8 years of aimless wandering, feeling lost, hopeless, and depressed. I'll be focusing on 2.5 years where I was more intentionally doing my job search and when I became more aware of God working in my life. But before I go on, just a quick background about who I am. My name is Angela, and I'll be 31 next month. I was born to Christian parents, and I grew up in the church. However, for most of my life, I was practicing Christianity, and I knew about God, but I didn't quite have that personal, intimate relationship with Him. I definitely had my moments of deeper intimacy with Him growing up, but they were short lived. In the summer of 2018, I started on a renewed walk with God, and since then I know and feel that God has been ever so present in my life and allowing me to experience Him deeply. And ever since that summer, I have these different chapters or themes in my life where I feel or know that God is doing something or about to do something. And this is my testimony of when I was living through a certain theme where God was disciplining and pruning me to surrender and trust Him. At the age of 30, I was working part-time a few hours here and there. My round-trip commute was about 4 hours long, and I had to take the Long Island Railroad, which cost a lot of money. I was really unhappy and unmotivated because I was making a tiny bit of money, and I felt that the job was not worth my time or effort. At that time, my younger sister, who had gotten married about a year prior, was pregnant and close to giving birth. I was elated for my sister and so excited, but I'd be lying if I didn't say a part of me was envious. All my life, I had excelled in school, attended one of the top New York City high schools, went to a pretty good college with a full scholarship and even a stipend. When I came out of college, though, I realized I couldn't do anything with my degree, or I just didn't know what to do with it. For about 8 years, I watched my peers becoming lawyers, doctors, college professors. I even saw younger people I had once taught in summer schools and after schools graduating from fancy colleges or starting their path on stable and well-paying jobs. Yeah, I had a problem with pride and low self-esteem. During my first year out of college, I tried many different jobs: dental, podiatry, gastroenterology, law, and I consistently had part-time positions at summer school or after schools and as a private tutor. I even took certification courses and went back to college a number of times in an attempt to get a new degree. I wanted a somewhat fancy title and the fancy salary and lifestyle that went with it. I had struggled for most of my life with low self-esteem, and I felt that the only thing I could somewhat show off was my academics, which I subconsciously correlated to a great job and high salary. Ever since I was younger, my mom always told me that I should become a teacher or work in the education field. But no, that title was not fancy enough for me. I felt like it was too easy of a position to go for. I wanted to go for something where people would say like, wow, Angela became this. I had been teaching and tutoring for so many years though, and to be honest, it was something that came naturally to me, which made it feel easy and not like so much of an accomplishment. And of course, I would later realize that this is a gift that God has given me. In 2015, God led me to apply to a graduate program in school counseling, which combines my passion for education and social emotional development. I had kind of given up on the whole title thing. I just wanted to do something that I knew I was good at. I do admit that at the time I was still looking at the numbers, but I was miserable my whole 3 years in the program. But yeah, I'll talk about that in another video. After becoming certified as a school counselor, I started applying to jobs before I even graduated with my master's. I was quite certain that I'll land a job because I had over 10 years of experience working as a teacher and even as a director in various summer school programs and after schools. I was also a private tutor and had a couple years of experience working with young children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. I was so wrong though. The market was extremely saturated, and I learned that the public school system was not hiring any new counselors for the last several years. There was a hiring freeze. I sought out all private schools, applying to not only full-time and part-time school counseling positions, but all positions even remotely related to it, and even jobs completely unrelated. All this time, God was good. And He continued to provide. I worked here and there, and I always had enough money that I didn't have to ask my family to buy me food or things that I wanted. However, I was hungry for that stable, full-time position as a school counselor. In the fall of 2018, a couple months after graduating from my counseling program, I was offered a $37,000 position. Okay, so funny thing is that I left this information out when I was writing this up yesterday, but wow, okay, God, I'll push down that stupid pride and be more vulnerable. Yes, $37,000. At the age of 29 with a master's degree, I was not expecting to be making that kind of salary. But yes, I was desperate, so I took it. I thank God because it was exactly what I needed. The salary humbled me, the grueling work that I did humbled me, dealing with angry, cursing clients humbled me, and my 6 months there helped me develop certain character traits and a level of professional maturity that I did not have prior. In August of 2019, after 3 interviews, I was finally offered a full-time job at an insurance agency. They were offering me a salary of $52,000. Yeah, not bad, especially compared to my last job. They even offered free lunch and had a partnership with a mental health foundation that I could become involved with. But there was a bit of a problem. I was waiting on the results of an amazing interview I had recently with a specialized high school in New York City. I had met with the assistant principal, and this sounds really cocky, but I'm really not exaggerating. She was constantly, from start to finish, like saying that their school needed someone like me, and she had seen that I was volunteering at a nursing home and that I'd worked with children with disabilities, and she kept saying that she could see the genuine heart in me to help others. And she even went so far as to say that there was a partnering organization at their school that provided counseling services, and she said that if she couldn't hire me because of the hiring freeze, she would talk with the organization and try to hook up a position for me. Okay, so here I was after more than 8 years of aimless wandering and 5 years into my job search struggle, desperate to finally land something good, and it looked like I was going to finally make it. I just needed a little bit of time to hear back from that high school assistant principal. But the insurance agency told me I had to give them an answer in the next 2 days. And I told them I'd give them an answer as soon as possible. Oh man, my 2-day time was coming to an end, and I still had heard nothing back from that assistant principal. People around me started to advise me to accept the insurance agency job and start working. And if I got the job offer from the high school, I could just quit the insurance agency job. Or if I didn't get the offer from the high school, I can just stay at the insurance agency. Obviously, a very logical and smart thing to do. Now, during this time, I had been reading a book called Experiencing God by Henry and Richard Blackaby and Claude King, and I had been praying a lot more intentionally. I've been trying really hard to surrender before God and seek His will above mine, and also to delight in His will, even though it might not be what I wanted. I wanted to surrender all that I was and just trust in Him. And I refer to Pastor George Mueller's approach to enter into a heart relationship with God. The first step was to get my heart into such a place that it had no will of its own in regard to a given matter. Also, during that time, I was I was talking a lot with a new brother I had met at my church's young adult retreat a couple weeks prior. The interesting thing about meeting him was that we had not talked the whole time we were at the retreat, but on the last day, as we were packing up to leave, I was sitting with a close friend and just chatting about my job search, God's will, and the book that I was reading, and he just sat next to me and joined our conversation. And for the next couple of weeks, he messaged me Bible verses and words to encourage me every single day. And I kept him updated with the job offer that I got from the insurance agency and the timeline of everything that was happening. And he reminded me of the story in Genesis where Abram and Sarai were promised a son, Isaac, but instead of waiting for that son, they took matters into their own hands and they bore Ishmael. And according to Genesis 17:21, God says, "But I will establish my covenant with Isaac." God's big picture was with Isaac, not Ishmael. The message I got from this was that I had to trust God to give me exactly what He planned for me. And I knew that whatever He planned for me was far greater than I could imagine. At this point in time, I wasn't sure what the best or what his plan looked like, and whether God even intended for me to become a school counselor. However, I did know that my whole life I'd been an educator and that I had a very empathizing heart for those in need. I'd also heard growing up that I was a great listener and people tended to share things with me. School counseling was basically the merging of my work experience, what I was passionate about, and my talents. Furthermore, people around me assured me that this path was suitable for me. Blackaby writes in his book that God speaks by the Holy Spirit through the Bible, prayer, circumstances, and the church to reveal himself, his purposes, and his ways. By this time, I really should have been certain, but my faith was still lacking. On the day of the deadline, after reading a little from my Experiencing God book, I knelt down to pray. I just started to tell God all of my feelings, thoughts, and how frustrated and confused I was. I prayed and I asked him to help me to surrender to his will. But I know that deep inside, I was still hoping that I would get that school counseling position and not the insurance agency job. As I prayed, I suddenly felt that God was telling me to reject the job offer from the insurance agency. The feeling I had was so sudden, so impactful, that I knew immediately that it was God. I started to sob, and I remember telling him, okay, I'm going to reject it. And then I kept saying over and over that I was scared and asked him like what he was going to do. But deep in my heart, there was a peace coming over me and that only God can give. My God had just spoken and he had just told me to forget about the job and trust him. When I finished praying, I contacted the insurance agency and turned down the offer. The very next day, the high school assistant principal sent me a reply. It was a rejection. I was devastated. The thoughts going through my head were, how can this be? I thought she clearly said she needed me. I just rejected a great job offer. What am I going to do now? I was so frustrated at the thought of having to go back to my resumes and write cover letters and go to interviews just to be rejected all over again. I cried a lot after that rejection email. Then I cried some more as I prayed that night. The next day, my heart was filled with peace and I knew that I had made the right choice. A couple friends actually told me to call the insurance agency and tell them I changed my mind, but I was so sure that God had told me to reject it that I didn't do that. I didn't call the insurance agency. The good news was that I got over it pretty quickly. I was kind of used to rejection by that point. After that rejection, my prayers changed. My willingness to surrender became real. I had given up a decent job after a 2.5-year search, and now all I could do was to trust in God. I had nothing to lose. Whether it was school counseling or an unrelated job or whatever else God had in store for me, I was more and more sincerely surrendering myself to his will and trusting him to just do his thing. I had experienced God speaking to me and I wanted to trust him fully. 10 days after that rejection, I had a phone interview with an elementary school in the Bronx. Soon after, I was asked to come in for an on-site interview where I would have to deliver a demo lesson. I adapted a lesson plan I had already created for a prior interview, and I didn't even take my time to test it out. On the morning of the interview, I complained to my mom that I didn't want to go, and I literally was debating whether I should turn down that interview before I started my commute to go there. On the train, I realized I had not prepared one of the materials for the demo lesson, so I just took out my a big pair of scissors from my bag on the train and I started to cut away at papers and I was like shoving them in my bag and everything. It was a mess. After I got off the train, I had to rush, so I was like walking really, really fast because I was going to make it just on time and not the 15 minutes earlier recommendation for interviews. When I made it to the door, the security guard asked me to wait outside because they were doing a fire drill. So I had to wait outside for about 5 minutes. I was able to catch my breath and I was actually able to observe the students and all the staff as they filed past me. As I sat inside waiting for my interviewers, I realized that I had not prepared any end of the interview questions. Wow, I was not prepared for this interview at all. My heart just was not in it. And I think because of that, I just was not really nervous. So I was able to be myself during the demo lesson, despite there being a student who was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. He was refusing to follow directions and to do any of the lessons in my demo lesson. But because of my past experience working with children with autism, I was able to get that child to participate in my demo lesson successfully. 2 days later, and after 2.5 years of rejections and a lot of tears and a lot of growth, I finally heard the words I've been dreaming of. I texted every family member and friend who had supported, encouraged, and motivated me during this time. How grateful I was to God, not only for this job, but because I had so many people to share my joy with. I now have only 2 weeks left of my first year as a school counselor, and wow, just looking back, I am so thankful to God. He has been so gracious and so good to me. I've come to experience firsthand God as my provider, as being faithful, and being just so full of compassion and grace. During my first year, I encountered students who apparently didn't open up to other staff members, but they opened up to me. And I met with parents who normally could get very angered and heated, but with me, they would be so sweet and they would hang up the phone or leave the meeting thanking me. My coworkers were so good to me. They constantly acknowledged the work I did, gave me support, and praised me, which helped to boost my self-esteem, which I had struggled with for a really long time. God made sure that I not only had His favor, but the favor of man as well. In my first week there, I learned that in my first week there, I learned that food there that wasn't opened by the students had to be thrown away. I started to collect some of the unopened food here and there from the students, and the compassionate God that I know moved my heart to give the food to the homeless on my commute home. After some time, students that I was close to started to help me collect the food from other students so that I could give to the homeless. On a few occasions when I wasn't even in the office, a couple of my students collected food and brought it to my desk with a cute handwritten note. There were instances where I can only explain as God's doing. For example, there was a student going through an extremely traumatic situation, and one day I decided to do something that was very unlikely, but that something allowed me to figure out that a traumatic thing was happening to this child. And this in turn allowed for a police investigation to occur, and the student was protected as well as connected with a mental health organization to start on her path to healing. This job was prepared for me well in advance before I even got certified. God spent more than 2.5 years molding and disciplining me to fit right in and serve where God had already been working. And this is amazing grace. Another thing I want to mention is God's perfect timing. God knew that I needed those years of maturing, not only mentally and emotionally, but spiritually as well. He knew that I needed more real life experience with certain groups of students and families to prepare me for the difficult work I'll be encountering at my new job position. Oh, and one last thing. Apparently, the school had 400 plus applicants for this one position, and after going through a bunch of interviews, they had chosen a guy to work there. But he quit the day before school started, and then I came along, or should I say, God put me there. This was my story of how God helped me to trust Him fully and to learn how to truly surrender myself to His will through my 8 years of wondering and 2.5 year job search. Was that 8 years of waiting and feeling hopeless and desperate worth it? Oh yes. It was so hard during those years. However, it shaped me into who I am, and it brought me to a more intimate place with God where I experienced Him in new and deeper ways, and I wouldn't change that for anything. My prayer for you viewers is that that God will bring you to a place of intimacy, where you will have this personal one-on-one relationship with God, and that He will help you to just surrender and to just completely trust in Him. God just loves you so much, and He wants that relationship with you. It's just my sincere prayer, and I'll be praying for you that if you're in a time of just waiting, if you're in a time of just feeling lost and just not knowing where to go, I pray that you will just lose yourself, that you will relinquish all of the control that you have over your life and allow God to just be in control of you. Just allow God to show you where to go and just trust in Him.